I wasn't supposed to stop that night. The road stretched empty for miles, slick with rain that blurred the world into streaks of silver and shadow, my headlights cutting through it like a blade as the engine hummed beneath me, steady, controlled, predictable, just the way I liked everything in my life, no surprises, no interruptions, no weakness, and yet something felt off before I even saw them, a flicker at the edge of the road, a shape where there shouldn't be one, then two, small, unmoving figures crouched beside a broken guardrail like they had been forgotten by the world, and I should have kept driving, I always did, because stopping meant involvement and involvement meant risk, but my foot eased off the gas before my mind caught up, the car slowing until the tires whispered against the wet asphalt, and I told myself it was instinct, nothing more, just a calculation. Two children alone in the middle of nowhere meant attention, and attention meant problems that could circle back to me, so I pulled over, stepped out into the cold rain that soaked through my coat in seconds, and approached carefully, my senses sharp, scanning the darkness for anything out of place, but there was only silence and the soft sound of their breathing, two little girls, maybe 6 or 7, identical in a way that made it hard to tell them apart, their clothes damp, their faces pale but not frightened the way they should have been, and that was the first thing that unsettled me, because fear was something I understood, something I expected, but they looked at me like I was something familiar, something safe, and I didn't like that, not at all. Where are your parents? I asked, my voice quieter than usual, controlled, but one of them just tilted her head, studying me with eyes that caught the faint glow of my headlights, green, steady, too calm for a child in the dark, and then she reached out, her small hand brushing against mine like she had every right to, like she wasn't crossing a line no one ever crossed with me, and she said something that made the air feel different, heavier, like the world had shifted half an inch without warning. You smell like my dad, she whispered. Simple, innocent, but it hit harder than it should have, a strange, unfamiliar pressure tightening in my chest as I looked at her, really looked this time, at the shape of her eyes, the way her expression didn't waver, and I felt something I couldn't name, something I didn't allow myself to feel, so I pulled my hand back slightly, just enough to create distance, to remind myself who I was, what I was, because I didn't belong in moments like this. I wasn't built for them, and yet I couldn't walk away, not anymore, not after hearing that, not after seeing them like this, standing alone in a world that didn't care if they made it home or not, so I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, making a decision I didn't fully understand. Get in the car, I said, firm but not harsh, and they didn't hesitate, didn't question, just moved toward the open door like they had been waiting for me all along, and that was the second thing that felt wrong, because trust like that didn't come without a reason. And I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what that reason was, whether I wanted to or not. The car felt smaller with them inside it, like the air had shifted to make space for something I did not understand, and I kept my eyes on the road, hand steady on the wheel, listening to the quiet in the backseat that was not really quiet at all because I could feel them watching me, studying me in a way that made me more aware of every movement I made, every breath I took, and that was not something I was used to, not something I allowed. Are you cold? I asked after a minute, the question slipping out before I could stop it, unnecessary, irrelevant, but one of them nodded anyway, the one who had spoken before, the one with the steady eyes, and I reached over without looking, turning the heat up a few degrees, the warm air pushing through the vents, filling the silence with a low hum that should have made everything feel normal again, but it did not. Nothing about this felt normal. Not the way they had gotten into my car without hesitation. Not the way they sat there now, calm, composed, like this was expected, like I was expected. What are your names? I asked, sharper this time, grounding myself in something practical, something that made sense, and there was a brief pause before the other one answered, her voice softer but just as certain. Lily, she said, then she pointed to her sister, and she is Rose, and I nodded once, filing it away automatically. Names, details, patterns, that was how I processed the world, how I controlled it, but there was no pattern here that I could recognize, no explanation that fit, and that unsettled me more than anything else. Do you know where you are? I asked, glancing at them in the rearview mirror, and Lily shook her head slightly, her small fingers tracing the edge of the seat like she was thinking about something deeper than the question itself. We were with Mom, she said slowly, and then we were not, and something about the way she said it made my grip tighten just a fraction on the steering wheel, because it was too simple, too clean, like she had skipped over something important, something she did not want to say or did not know how to say. and I exhaled quietly, adjusting my approach. "What is your mom's name?" I asked, and this time both of them went still, not scared, not nervous, just still, and for the first time since they had gotten into the car, I felt something close to resistance, not from fear, but from choice, like they were deciding how much to give me, and that should not have been possible, not for children this young. But then Rose leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror, and she said it like it mattered, like it was something I should already know. "Emily," and the name hit me harder than it should have, a faint echo in the back of my mind, distant but persistent, like a memory I had buried without realizing it, and I did not like that, not at all, because I did not forget things, I did not leave pieces of my past unresolved, and yet there it was, a name that felt familiar in a way I could not explain, and I felt that same pressure again, that same shift in the air that had started the moment I stopped the car, so I focused on the road, on the lines. Painted. On the asphalt, on the steady rhythm of the engine, grounding myself in what I could control, but behind me, I could still feel their eyes, still feel that quiet certainty that they carried with them, and as the miles stretched out ahead of us, I realized something I could not ignore anymore. This was not just a coincidence, and whatever I had just stepped into was already deeper than I had intended, because somewhere between that empty road and this moment, the situation had stopped being about two lost children and started becoming something else entirely, something that was already pulling me in whether I wanted it to or not. The city lights came into view slowly, glowing through the rain like something distant and unreal, and I felt the shift before I acknowledged it, the moment where a simple decision turned into something permanent, because I was not taking them to the nearest police station, I was not calling anyone to report what I had found, and that realization settled into my chest with a weight I did not question, I simply accepted it. The same way I accepted every decision I made once it was set in motion. "Are we going home?" Rose asked from the back seat, her voice soft but steady, and I did not answer right away because I did not know what home meant in this situation, not for them, not for me, so I chose the only answer that kept control in my hands. "You are safe," I said instead, and the word sounded unfamiliar coming from me, like something borrowed from a version of myself I did not recognize, but neither of them questioned it, neither of them doubted it. And that trust settled deeper than it should have. The car turning off the main road, tires rolling over smooth pavement as the gates ahead began to open before I even slowed down, security recognizing the vehicle, the routine seamless and silent, and I glanced at them in the mirror as we passed through, watching their reactions carefully, but there was no fear, no awe, just quiet observation, like they were taking everything in and storing it away, and that unsettled me more than panic ever could have, because panic I knew how to handle. Panic was predictable, but this calm, this certainty, it made no sense. The car coming to a stop beneath the covered entrance, the rain fading into a distant sound as I stepped out and moved around to open the back door, the warm light from inside spilling across the pavement, and for a moment I just stood there, looking at them, really looking this time, at the identical lines of their faces, the way their expressions mirrored each other without effort, and again that feeling returned, sharp and uninvited. Like recognition without memory. "Come on," I said quietly, stepping back to give them space, and they climbed out without hesitation, their small shoes touching the ground like they had done it 100 times before, like this place did not intimidate them, like I did not intimidate them, and that was wrong, it should have been wrong, but I let it happen anyway, leading them inside, the doors closing behind us with a soft, final sound that echoed more than it should have. Staff appearing almost instantly, silent, efficient, waiting for instructions, and I gave them none for a second longer than necessary, my mind already moving ahead, already calculating what needed to be done, who needed to be contacted, what information needed to be pulled. "Prepare a room," I said finally, my voice returning to something colder, something controlled, and they nodded without question, moving quickly, but Lily's hand found mine again before I could step away, her small fingers wrapping around mine with quiet certainty. And I looked down at her, something tightening in my chest that I could not explain. "You are staying, right?" she asked, and it was not fear, not really, it was expectation, like the answer was already decided, and for a second I hesitated, something I had not done in years, something I did not allow, but then I nodded once, a short, controlled movement. "I am not going anywhere," I said, and the word settled into the room like a promise I had not planned to make, and as I watched them follow the staff down the hall, disappearing into a space that was never meant for them, I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone with a precision that felt automatic, dialing a number I had not used in a long time, waiting only a second before the line connected. "I need everything on a woman named Emily," I said, my voice low, measured, leaving no room for delay. "Full history, last known location, connections, everything." There was a pause on the other end, brief but noticeable, and then a simple response, "Understood," and I ended the call without another word, standing there in the quiet that followed. The rain still tapping faintly against the window somewhere far away, and I realized something I could not ignore anymore. Whatever this was, whatever I had stepped into, it was not going to let me walk away, because for the first time in a long time, something had found its way into my world without permission, and it was already starting to change the rules. Sleep did not come easily that night, not for me, and I told myself it was because I was waiting on information, because I needed facts before I made my next move, but the truth was quieter and far more inconvenient. It was the image of them walking down that hallway, small and certain, like they belonged somewhere they had never been before, and I did not like the way that stayed with me, not when I had spent years making sure nothing stayed unless I allowed it. The soft knock at my office door came just after midnight, precise, controlled, and I did not need to look up to know who it was. "Come in," I said, my voice steady, and the door opened just enough for Daniel to step inside, his expression neutral but his eyes already telling me he had something. "You asked for everything on an Emily," he said, placing a thin folder on the desk in front of me. Simple, unremarkable. But I knew better than to underestimate what it contained. "There are more than a few," he continued, "but only one that fits the timeline and the location." I leaned back slightly, watching him, giving nothing away. "Go on," I said, and he nodded once, opening the folder. "Emily Carter, 28 years old, no criminal record, no known affiliations, works part-time at a small clinic about 15 miles from here, keeps a low profile, no social media presence beyond a basic account that has not been active in years." He paused, just briefly, like he was deciding how much to say next, and that caught my attention more than the information itself. "What?" I asked, sharper now, and he met my gaze without hesitation. "She has 2 daughters," he said, and the room felt quieter than it should have, like the air had shifted again, like something unseen had just moved into place. "Twins," he added, and I felt it then, not confusion, not surprise, something else entirely, something deeper, something that did not fit into any of the categories I trusted. "How old?" I asked, my voice lower now, controlled but edged with something I could not quite suppress. 6, he said, and that number settled into me like it had always been there, like it had been waiting, and I did not like how easily it connected to something I had not thought about in years, a night I had dismissed, a moment I had chosen not to revisit, because it had not mattered then, because nothing about it had seemed important enough to remember, and yet now it stood there in front of me, quiet and undeniable. "Where is she now?" I asked, already knowing I was not going to like the answer, and Daniel hesitated again, just for a second. "That is the problem," he said carefully. "She was reported missing this evening," and I felt something tighten in my chest, sharper this time, more defined, because that meant the timeline matched too well. It meant the pieces were already aligning whether I wanted them to or not, and I closed the folder slowly, my fingers pressing against the cover like that could somehow change what was inside, but it did not. Nothing about this was going to change, not now, not after everything had already started moving. "Have someone at the house?" Daniel asked, his tone shifting slightly, more cautious now, like he was reading something in my expression that I was not fully aware of, and I shook my head once, a controlled movement. "No," I said, my voice returning to something colder, something familiar. "No one goes near them without my say." He nodded immediately, understanding the weight behind that instruction, and turned to leave, but I stopped him before he reached the door. "Daniel," I said, and he paused. Looking back, waiting. "Do not contact her yet," I added, and that was not strategy, not entirely. It was something else, something I did not want to examine too closely, because for the first time in a long time, I was not sure if I was trying to find answers, or if I was trying to delay the moment I would have to face them. Morning came too quietly, the kind of quiet that made everything feel suspended, like the world was waiting for something to happen, and I stood outside the guest room door longer than I should have, my hand resting against the frame without knocking, without moving, because I was not used to hesitation, not like this, not over something so simple. But then I heard it, soft laughter from inside, light and unguarded, and it did something unexpected. It pulled me forward before I could stop myself, my fingers pressing against the handle, opening the door just enough to look inside, and there they were, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a spread of papers and colored pencils scattered around them, the morning light coming through the windows catching in their hair, making everything look softer than it should have been, and for a moment I just watched, silent, unnoticed, taking in the way they leaned toward each other, the way they moved in perfect sync without even trying. And I felt that same pressure again, stronger now, more defined, like something inside me was trying to connect pieces I had not given it permission to touch. "You came back," Lily said suddenly, without looking up at first, like she had known I was there all along, and then her eyes lifted to meet mine, steady, certain, and I stepped inside without thinking, closing the door behind me. "I said I would," I replied, my voice lower than usual, more controlled than necessary, but she only nodded. Like that was enough, like promises meant something in a way I had never believed they did, and Rose held up a piece of paper then, her small hand extending it toward me without hesitation. "We drew this," she said, and I took it before I could question why I was even participating in something like this, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the paper as I looked down. And that was when everything inside me went still, because it was not just a drawing, it was a house, large, detailed, unmistakable, the kind of structure that mirrored the one they were standing in now. But that was not what caught my attention, it was the figures drawn in front of it, 3 of them, 2 smaller ones holding hands, and 1 taller figure standing just behind them, not touching, not reaching, just there, present. And I felt something shift in my chest, something I did not have a name for. "That is you," Rose added quietly, pointing at the taller figure, her voice calm, like she was stating a fact, not asking a question, and I looked at her, really looked this time, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that suggested she was guessing, but there was none, just that same certainty I had seen from the beginning, and it unsettled me more than anything else, because certainty like that did not come from nothing. "Why would you draw me?" I asked, my tone sharper than intended, but neither of them flinched, neither of them pulled back, and Lily tilted her head slightly, studying me the way she had the night before. "Because you found us," she said simply, like that explained everything, like that was enough to make me part of whatever world they lived in, and I exhaled slowly, forcing my focus back into something I could control, something I could understand, but even as I did, I realized something that I could not ignore anymore. They were not reacting to me like strangers, they were not adjusting, not questioning, not afraid, they were accepting, as if I had always been there, as if I had always been meant to be there, and that thought settled into me with a weight I could not shake, because if that was true, if even a part of that was true, then this was no longer just about finding their mother, it was about something far more complicated, something that reached back into a past I had chosen to forget. And as I looked down at that drawing again, at the way the 3 figures stood together in front of a place that was supposed to belong only to me, I realized that whatever answers I was searching for, they were not going to come easily. And they were not going to leave me unchanged. By the time I left the room, the drawing was still in my hand, the edges slightly bent where my grip had tightened without me noticing, and I did not return it. I told myself it was because I needed to think, because I needed distance, but the truth was simpler and far more inconvenient. I did not want to let it go yet. The hallway felt colder than before, quieter, like the entire house had adjusted to something it did not understand, and I walked straight to my office without stopping, closing the door behind me with a controlled motion that did nothing to settle the unease building under my skin. I placed the paper on the desk and stared at it longer than necessary, analyzing every line, every detail, because that was what I did. I broke things down until they made sense, but this did not, none of it did, not the way they looked at me, not the way they spoke, not the way they fit into a space they had never seen before, and most of all, not the way that name kept echoing in the back of my mind, Emily. It was no longer distant now, no longer faint, it was closer, clearer, tied to something I had buried deliberately, something I had chosen not to revisit because it had not mattered at the time, because it had been one night, one moment, a mistake I had categorized and moved past without hesitation, but now it refused to stay buried, now it demanded attention. And I did not like that. Not when control was something I had built everything on. The phone rang once before it was answered. "I need a test arranged," I said without introduction, my voice steady, precise, and there was no question on the other end, no hesitation, just a simple acknowledgement. "Understood," because I did not explain myself, I did not need to, not to the people who worked for me. "Today," I added, and ended the call before anything else could be said, setting the phone down with a quiet finality that echoed louder than it should have. And for a moment I stood there, still, letting the silence settle around me, because I already knew what this meant, I already understood the direction this was heading, and yet I still needed confirmation, I still needed something concrete, something undeniable, because without it, there was still room to walk away, still room to dismiss all of this as coincidence, as circumstance, as anything other than what it was starting to look like, but deep down, I knew better. I had known the moment Lily took my hand on that empty road, I had known the moment Rose said that name, and I had known it again when I saw that drawing, 3 figures standing in front of a place that had never belonged to anyone but me, and I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my face in a rare moment of unguarded thought, because if I was right, if even part of this was true, then everything was about to change in a way I could not control, and control had always been the one thing I never lost, not for anyone, not for anything. A soft knock at the door pulled me back, sharp and immediate, and I straightened automatically, the hesitation gone, replaced by something colder, something familiar. "Come in," I said, and Daniel stepped inside, his expression tighter than before, like he had more to say than he wanted to. "We found her," he said, and that was enough to still everything again, every thought, every calculation, every instinct narrowing down to a single point. "Where?" I asked, my voice lower now, quieter, but far more dangerous in its control, and he held my gaze as he answered. "She is here," he said. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Completely, not uncertainty, not hesitation, something final, something irreversible, because whatever this was, whatever truth had been circling around me since last night, it had just stepped through the door, and it was no longer waiting for me to be ready. For a second, I did not move, not because I did not understand what Daniel had said, but because I understood it too well, and movement would make it real in a way I could not take back. "Where is she?" I asked again, slower this time, each word deliberate, controlled, and Daniel stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the hallway as if that was answer enough, and I did not wait for anything else. I was already moving, already crossing the distance with measured steps that felt heavier than they should have, the house quieter than before, like it was holding its breath, and I saw her before she saw me, standing at the far end of the hall near the entrance, her posture tense but upright, her eyes scanning the space like she was searching for something she had already lost, and for a moment I just watched, because something about her felt familiar in a way that had nothing to do with recognition, something deeper, something that pressed against the edges of a memory I had refused to revisit. And then she turned, her gaze locking onto mine, and everything stopped, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to make the space between us feel different, heavier, charged with something neither of us had said yet. "Where are they?" she asked immediately, her voice steady but edged with something sharper, something that did not hide the urgency beneath it, and I noted that. The lack of hesitation, the absence of fear. Because most people did not speak to me like that, not in my own house, but she did, and that told me more than any file ever could. "They are safe," I replied, my tone even, giving her exactly what she needed and nothing more, but she did not relax, not completely, her shoulders still tight, her eyes still searching, like she was waiting for proof, and I stepped closer, just enough to close part of the distance between us, studying her now with the same precision I applied to everything else. Taking in the details, the lines of her face, the way her expression held control even under pressure, and then I saw it, not clearly at first, just a flicker, a shape of something I could not ignore, something that aligned too closely with what I had already started to suspect, and I felt that same shift again, sharper now, undeniable. "Emily," I said, not as a question, but as confirmation, and something in her expression changed, just slightly, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, like she had expected this moment and still was not ready for it. "You should not have brought them here," she said, her voice lower now, more controlled, but there was something underneath it, something protective. Something that made my focus sharpen instantly. "They were alone," I replied, my tone cooling, because I did not justify my decisions, not to anyone, but she held my gaze without flinching, without backing down. "They were not supposed to be found," she said, and that was when everything inside me went still, because that was not the response of someone relieved, that was not the response of a mother who had lost her children and just gotten them back. It was something else entirely, something calculated, something that suggested this was not an accident, not a coincidence, but a situation that had been controlled until I stepped into it, and I felt the edges of my control tighten in response, my voice lowering as I stepped closer, closing the space between us until there was no room for anything but the truth. "Then you are going to explain to me," I said quietly, each word precise, deliberate. Why your daughters were standing alone in the middle of an empty road in the rain, and for the first time, she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm that whatever she was about to say was not the whole truth, and I recognized that immediately, because I had spent years reading people, understanding what they said and what they chose not to say, and Emily Carter was no exception. But as I stood there, watching her decide how much to reveal, I realized something else that mattered far more than any answer she could give me. This was no longer just about them, it was no longer just about her, it was about the connection that had already formed, the one I had tried to ignore, the one that refused to stay buried, and as her eyes met mine again, steady, unyielding, I knew without needing confirmation that whatever truth was coming next was not going to change that, it was only going to make it impossible to walk away. She did not answer right away, and that silence told me more than words ever could, because it was not confusion, not fear, it was calculation, the kind that came from someone who had already thought through every possible outcome and was now deciding which version of the truth to give me, and I watched her closely. Every shift in her expression, every breath she took, because that was where the real answers lived, not in what she said, but in what she could not fully hide. They were never supposed to be on that road, she said finally, her voice controlled but quieter now, like she understood the weight of what she was admitting without saying it outright, and I let that settle for a moment, letting the implication stretch between us, because that was not an explanation. It was a deflection, but they were, I replied, my tone even, leaving no space for anything but clarity, and her jaw tightened slightly, just enough to confirm that she knew exactly what I was asking, exactly what I was not going to let go. I was trying to keep them away from this, she continued, her eyes flicking briefly around the space before returning to me, from you, and there it was, direct, intentional, no hesitation now, and something inside me shifted at that. Something sharp and immediate, because that was not fear speaking, that was decision, that was someone who had chosen a path and followed it for years without looking back. You made that decision without me, I said, my voice lowering, not louder, but heavier, more precise, and she held my gaze, not backing down, not apologizing. I made that decision for them, she corrected, and the difference mattered more than she realized, because it meant this had never been about me, not really. It had been about control, about protection, about keeping something hidden long enough that it could no longer be questioned, but that time was over now, whether she wanted it to be or not. You do not get to decide that anymore, I said quietly, and for the first time, something real flickered in her expression, not fear exactly, but something close to it, something that came from realizing that the situation had shifted beyond her control, and she looked away for just a second, her hand tightening slightly at her side, like she was holding onto something invisible, something she was not ready to let go of. You do not understand what you are asking for, she said, softer now, and I stepped closer, closing the last of the distance between us, because I was not asking, not anymore. Then explain it to me, I replied, and this time she did not look away. This time she met my gaze fully, like she had reached the point where there was no more space to avoid it, no more room to redirect. 6 years ago, she began, and the words settled into the air like something inevitable, something that had been waiting for this moment to be said out loud. You do not remember me, she added. Not as an accusation, but as a fact, and that hit differently than it should have, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed something I had already begun to realize, that whatever connected us, whatever had happened, it had not mattered enough for me to hold on to it, but it had mattered enough for her to build an entire life around it, to protect it, to hide it, and that imbalance settled into the space between us like something heavy and unresolved. It was one night, she continued, her voice steady but quieter now, you left before morning, and I never saw you again, and there it was, simple, direct, undeniable, and I felt that memory surface fully now, no longer distant, no longer fragmented, but clear, precise, exactly as I had left it, and I did not like how easily it connected to everything standing in front of me now, how quickly the timeline aligned, how perfectly the pieces fit together. I found out later, she said, her voice tightening just slightly, and I made a choice, and I already knew what that choice had been. I had seen it in everything she had done, in the way she spoke, in the way she stood in front of me now, protecting something she had carried alone for years, and I felt something shift again, deeper this time, something I could not ignore even if I wanted to, because the truth was no longer something I was approaching, it was something I was already standing inside, and as I looked at her, really looked at her now, not as a stranger, not as a problem to solve, but as the person who had been part of something I had dismissed too easily. I realized that whatever came next was not going to be simple, not going to be clean, because this was not just about the past anymore. It was about everything that had grown from it, everything that was standing just down the hall, waiting without even knowing what they were waiting for. And I knew without needing to say it out loud that there was only one question left that mattered, and it was one neither of us could avoid any longer. The silence after her words did not feel empty, it felt full, heavy with everything that had not been said for 6 years, and I stood there, looking at her, while the past settled into place with a precision I could not deny, every detail aligning too cleanly to ignore, every instinct I had telling me the same thing before I even needed confirmation, and for the first time in a long time, I did not speak right away, because this was not a negotiation, not a situation I could control with strategy or distance. This was something else entirely, something that reached into parts of my life I had kept separate, untouched, and I felt the weight of that in a way I was not prepared for. You were going to keep them from me, I said finally, my voice quieter than before, but sharper, more defined, and she did not deny it, did not soften it, she simply held my gaze and nodded once, a small, controlled movement that carried more certainty than any explanation could have. I was going to protect them, she said, and there was no hesitation in that, no apology, just truth, and I understood that, more than I wanted to, because I recognized that same instinct, that same need to control what mattered, to decide what stayed and what did not. But this was different, because this time, it was not just her decision to make, not anymore, and I exhaled slowly, letting that realization settle into something solid, something I could stand on. They are not just yours, I said, and the words felt unfamiliar, heavier than anything I had said before, because they carried something I had never claimed, never acknowledged, and yet now they stood there between us, undeniable, and something in her expression shifted at that, not resistance, not exactly, but something more complicated, something that understood the truth of it even if she did not want to accept it. You do not know what that means, she replied, her voice softer now, but no less firm, and I stepped back slightly, just enough to create space, not distance, because distance was no longer possible, but enough to think, to breathe, to adjust to a reality that had already begun to change without waiting for my permission. And then I heard it, laughter again, faint but unmistakable, coming from down the hall, light and unaware, untouched by everything that was unfolding around them, and that sound did something I could not ignore. It grounded everything, it stripped away the complication, the history, the conflict, and left only what mattered, and I turned my head slightly, listening for just a second longer before looking back at her. They do not know, I said, not as a question, but as a statement, and she shook her head immediately. No, she replied, and there was something fragile in that now, something she had not shown before, something that came from carrying a truth too large to share, and I nodded once, slowly, because that made sense, because children like that, children who looked at the world with certainty instead of fear, they had not been given reasons to question it yet, and for a moment, I considered what would happen when that changed, when they understood, when they saw everything the way it really was, and I felt something tighten in my chest at the thought, something protective, something I had never allowed myself to feel before, and I did not push it away this time. I let it stay, just enough to understand what it meant. They will, I said quietly, and she looked at me, searching for something in my expression, something that told her what I was about to do, and I held her gaze without hesitation, because this was the one thing I was sure of now, the one thing I was not going to step back from. But not like this, I added, my voice steady, controlled, but different now, not colder, not distant. Something else, something she noticed immediately, because her expression changed again, subtle but unmistakable, like she was seeing something she had not expected to find. You do not get to decide everything anymore, I said, not as a threat, not as a challenge, but as a fact, and the silence that followed was not empty this time. It was settled, like something had shifted into place, something that was not going to move again, and I turned toward the hallway without waiting for her response, because some decisions did not need agreement, they only needed action. My steps steady as I moved toward the sound of their voices, toward the part of this that was no longer a question, and as I reached the door, pausing just long enough to hear them inside, still laughing, still unaware, I realized something I had not expected when this began.